Clarke? I just came back to Maine. I run away periodically.
No, and I'm hiding in suitcases now.
I've run away twice as far, but I used to.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome to the TLP meeting, the Tidewater Liberty Park. And this is in Mom's Kitchen, and it's Saturday, August the 17th, 2024. So here we are all gathered together again. We're lucky to have a guest speaker, a well-known attorney who handles eminent domain cases, and we're going to hear a lot about eminent domain today, which seems to be a topic of some conversation in this city. But before we introduce our guest speaker, we'll have an invocation from John Moss, who's coming up here now, one of our mayor candidates. And then we'll hold up the flag and have the Pledge of Allegiance. John, thank you.
Thank you for that very kind release. If you would all please rise and remove your cover as is your custom, and remain standing for the pledge afterwards. Dear Lord, we assemble in your name and petition for humility and wisdom and good health. We ask you to look out of those who are less fortunate, especially provide your protective hand over those in harm's way in foreign lands and on the seas, protecting our liberty here at home. Please grant our leader the wisdom to know your word and to know the value of liberty and freedom, and to watch out over those who have serious illnesses, and in this time of tremendous financial stress and social disruption, grant us the wisdom to be compassionate and at the same time understanding and reach out to those in need. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Yes, please. Just lift it up.
I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Play ball, Shane.
Thank you, John. Very good, thank you. So today we're honored to have Steve Clarke. He's with the law offices of Waldo and Lyle. And he's currently very actively representing a man named Frank Walton, who owns the Walton Funeral Home on Holland Road. Many of you drive down Holland Road and see it. It's sort of isolated out there in a patch of woods, and that woods is being penetrated by high tension wires overhead. And they're going to be on top of his funeral home, or close to it. And he is interested in getting a recompense for that. It's an eminent domain takings, in a sense, and it's an unusual case, I would say, but we'll hear all about that from Mr. Clarke, Esquire.
Okay, Stephen Clarke, let's hear.
Thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you for inviting me. Again, my name is Steve Clarke. I'm an attorney with Waldo and Lyle. Our office is in Norfolk, but we do work all across the Commonwealth, and all we do is represent property owners in eminent domain cases. That's all our firm has ever done for over 20 years now. And as Bill mentioned, I'm representing currently, among a number of different property owners, the owner of Walton Funeral Home, Frank Walton, which is just down the road here on Holland Road. Dominion Power, as many of you know, is proceeding with what they call the Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind Project, which I think is a total of 176 turbines out of the ocean. And as part of that, they're also increasing the number of electric transmission lines in order to carry the electricity that will be generated by these wind turbines onto the grid. And in particular, the turbines, the electricity will come ashore underground all the way until a new switching station, which is located on Oceana property. And then for station, it's about 14 miles of 3 new 230 kV transmission lines that will run to an existing station in Chesapeake, in Fentress area of Chesapeake. Unfortunately, Frank Walton found himself a year ago in the path of this project when he was first contacted by a right-of-way agent on behalf of Dominion Power. The agent sort of came out to the funeral home and met with him, told him, look, we want to put a little easement here, and we'll offer you $20,000, and here's an appraisal that we got that supports that offer. Frank asked them if they would stake out the area where the new easement would go, and they came and staked it out, and it comes basically right off the funeral home building, directly over their parking lot, over the entrance to the property. And even the agent for Dominion was surprised at how big the easement was and where it was located on the property. So needless to say, Frank said, no, I'm not interested in that. But because he said no, Dominion had previously gone to the State Corporation Commission and gotten approval for this project, and with that approval came the power to use eminent domain to take the private property for this project. Now Dominion, though they are a quasi-private public entity, they are a regulated monopoly, they can get the power to use eminent domain in certain circumstances, and typically it comes from going to the State Corporation Commission for approval. And so even though this is certainly a money-making proposition for Dominion, because our General Assembly has said that they can get the delegated power to take private property, they're allowed to do it in this case. They filed the eminent domain lawsuit in the fall, maybe the end of last year, 2023, and then maybe a month or two ago, they filed what they call an application for right of entry. Dominion, unlike, say, the city of Virginia Beach or VDOT or a different municipality or state agency, Dominion doesn't have what's called the quick take power. The city or VDOT could simply record a document in the land records called a certificate of take and deposit the offer into the court and then immediately take possession of the property that they want to take by eminent domain. Dominion can't do that, so they have to file the lawsuit in the circuit court and then file this application or petition for a right of entry. So we had a hearing on that a couple weeks ago, and Dominion had to prove 3 things, and according to the circuit court judge in Virginia Beach, they met that burden. They proved that there was a public necessity for this project and for the right to get on the Walton property right now as opposed to after the trial, which is scheduled for April of next year. And they proved, according to the judge, that there was an emergency that existed. And now I dispute that. I don't think there really is an emergency here. The way our state Supreme Court has defined the term emergency, it really, excuse me, looks to things like something that's sudden and unforeseen, what you would typically think of as sort of a dictionary definition of an emergency. In the court's decision, though, it simply was, well, they really need it now. That was kind of the crux of it, was we really want it, and so that's an emergency. And then the third thing they had to prove, and the court found to some degree, was they had to prove that if they could deposit the amount of the offer into the court, that would sufficiently protect the interests of the owner until the just compensation trial. And in these cases, the just compensation gets awarded by a jury of property owners in the jurisdiction. And so that's what's set for April. It's a 3-day trial. We'll have a jury of 5 landowners from Virginia Beach. And all we need is a majority of them. We just need 3 out of the 5 to agree on an award of compensation. But the court decided that, well, $20,000, that's not sufficient, but I'll make them triple it. And so they deposited a little over $60,000 into the court, and the judge said that's fine, that's sufficient for you to have access to the property. Now the funeral home, some of you may be aware of it, maybe you've utilized their services for loved ones, but it was founded by Frank's parents, Joseph and June Walton, in the late 1960s. And they're African American, and I think probably in Virginia Beach in the 1960s it was not the most friendly environment for African American businessmen and women. But I think over the past 50 57, 58 years. They've really made a niche for themselves and carved out a place in the city. I think they're the oldest African American owned funeral home in the city of Virginia Beach. And several years ago, Mr. Walton, Sr., Joseph Walton, passed along the business to his son. Frank had gone to mortuary school and was working there, and then took over it from his father. And it's a place that they have repeat clientele, and it's a place, if you ever driven by there, it's very secluded. There's kind of woods surrounding it. There's not a lot of, there's sort of neighborhoods as you drive towards it, and then you kind of drive past the funeral home, and it's mostly just kind of wooded area, and then you have to drive a little away, and then you get to some more neighborhoods again. And that's part of the appeal for the property, and part of the reason that I think it works so well and it's lasted and thrived for 57 years is it's a place where people come in these times of grief. Oftentimes the people that are coming there are very emotional. They are looking for solitude. They are looking for some sort of healing. They've lost a loved one or a friend. And so the idea to Frank of kind of these 3 new high voltage transmission lines running directly overhead, over the top of the parking lot, just off the corner of the building, was really incompatible with this kind of ongoing use of a funeral home, that he felt it would be distracting, and in some places would be off-putting for people who are coming to that property to be sort of confronted with this screen of high voltage lines. And look, we live with power lines all the time, and we understand that, but sometimes they have an impact on private property owners, and this is one of those times. And so Frank's view and our position is that, really what Dominion needs to do is the right thing, is help him adjust the property. I think Frank really wants to be able to probably move the funeral home building to a different location on the property that's further away from the power lines, if that's feasible. But let me tell you, $60,000 is not going to make that happen.
No.
And that's the good and the bad part about it, is that we still get our day in court. We still get to go in April to put on our opinion of just compensation and help a jury at that point understand what the impact will be. I'll get to your question in a minute. Thank you. One of the things that's, I think, really important in these cases is that right after we pick a jury at a just compensation trial in one of these cases, the judge, the jury, the parties, the lawyers, we all go out to the property. We have a little field trip to the property to see it. They call it the jury view, and it's really important, and the courts have said that is evidence in and of itself. It's not testimony, it's not documents, but it is evidence what the jurors can see from viewing the property. And I think by the time we get there in April, I imagine that the lines will mostly be installed. There are 3 new big kind of rust-colored monopoles that are installed directly across Holland Road from the property, and the lines will come across hanging on those. And we expect in the near future there will be 3 new monopoles that will be installed directly behind the funeral home property, and that will support the lines. But it will be cleared out for a long way in either direction, and it'll be the sort of arresting view of just sort of this corridor of high voltage transmission lines. So the jury will get to see that, and they will hear testimony not just from Dominion's appraiser, who when she valued the compensation, she said, I'm just going to assume this land is vacant. I'm not even going to value the building or any of the improvements. I'm just going to do an appraisal based on the assumption that it's just vacant land. Well, so of course she can't conclude that there's any negative impact to the building because she didn't value the building. But the jury's going to get to hear from an appraiser who will value the building. And again, I think that's our backstop in these cases, is we get to put on our evidence. I said this the other night, but there's a retired judge from Richmond who I met early on in my career, who used to do mediations, named Bob Harris, who used to say in the mediations regularly, you can't make a pancake too thin that it doesn't have 2 sides. And his point was, it's fine, you can hear their side of the story, and that's kind of the story that gets out and the court hears initially, but the property owner gets their opportunity in court, and we get to tell our side of the story, as well. So there's been some media coverage. I know the Pilot did an article about this. There was some TV news coverage as well, and there is sort of a groundswell of support. Frank, I know, has heard from a number of powerful leaders in the past few days that are really allied behind him, and I hope that will continue. I think it will, because I think people sort of react to the injustice of what's happened to him, and. Again, I think Frank is not looking for anything other than what's fair. In these types of cases, when the government, or in this case a public utility, takes property for a public use, then it's right for the public to bear the cost of that. That's the way our system is set up with regard to the power of eminent domain. Property can only be taken for a public use, but it has to be upon payment of just compensation. Otherwise, if the property owner isn't justly compensated, then that property owner is forced to bear more than his or her fair share of the cost. So Dominion, we feel is not being fair, certainly with the Walton Funeral Home and their actions. We worked very hard to try to resolve it with them. But ultimately, things sort of came to a head, and they said, no, we're moving forward with the court process, and we're gonna have this hearing on right of entry. So I would just encourage you, if you have the ability to support the Walton Funeral Home, I think we're probably gonna have a rally out there in the very near future, hopefully with some press coverage as well. I think the idea from our perspective is to just keep putting the pressure on Dominion Power to do the right thing. And I think they will. But what inspires me, honestly, in a lot of these situations is people like Frank who are willing to stand up for his constitutional rights. There's a lot of folks, I think Dominion will say something like 67 of the 69 property owners along this new project signed an easement and agreed. A lot of those folks unfortunately kind of feel like, well, I can't fight it. I might as well just kind of take something. Maybe it's not the full amount of fair compensation, but it's better than trying to put up a fight. Frank, to his credit, said, you know what, no, this is threatening my business, it's threatening my livelihood, it's threatening something that my parents built and that I've continued on. And he said, I'm gonna stand up for my right to receive that full and fair amount of just compensation. And so I applaud somebody like that, because it's people like that help me get energized to practice in this field of law every day. I'm happy to answer any questions or hear any comments. Yes, sir.
Well, it seems
Wait,
to me-
just a
Okay, I'm
moment.
sorry.
Sorry, no, that's quite all right.
Yeah, we have to. Gotta pick it up on live.
It seems to me that this has already been adjudicated. In other words, EPCO, whatever they're called.
Right.
I'm an old guy.
That's still what they're called,
Okay.
legally.
Well, it seems to me that they're gonna build now. And on April, whatever date you said, the only thing that he can get is compensation. There is no question apparently for his funeral home. It seems to me that they would build him a new funeral home on the property far enough away. That would be just compensation.
I would agree. They're not willing to do that at this point. I totally agree. That's the issue. It's just compensation at this point. The right or the ability to take the property is not in dispute. And generally, that was decided, frankly, before the circuit court proceedings. That was decided by the State Corporation Commission when they issued what's called a certificate of public convenience and necessity to Dominion VEPCO, saying this project, we authorize it, and with it comes the power to use eminent domain for it. So you're right. We're not trying to stop the taking. Frank has said, look, the project, great. If it generates all the electricity that Dominion says it's going to, great. But don't mistreat one particular private property owner in the service of this greater public good. Yes, sir.
To piggyback on that question, because that was my question, it seems, I thought that the whole process was going to be to stop them from building it in a specific location. So it's surprising, I'm glad I got to hear this, because they're gonna do that, and all it is compensation for Mr. Walton. And that seems, fair is not the right word, but not right. It is unfortunate that you're only gonna get your day in the court so that Mr. Walton gets his due amount of money. I think there's more to this than, I mean, they're building these lines, we've all known health-wise that those power lines are not healthy to people around it. I mean, this is a stupid joke, but it might improve his business, because people are gonna, but I mean, that's so surprising to me, that, they could just sort of decide that court, that we're gonna go and do this. And all Mr. Walton is getting is what he rightfully should get, compensation. And, this is, you know, I don't know if we have a friend, Eric Ray, who's like part of the funeral foundation in the state or whatever. I don't know if he's got on board with supporting Mr. Walton, because, this is, I think eminent domain is wrong anyway, but, it's just, I'm really glad, you're right, for him to stand up to them. And unfortunately, I thought he was standing up for them to stop it, move it somewhere else, but it's more like compensation. So I applaud him, I applaud you to what you're doing, and,
Yeah, thank
So-
you. Yeah, and thanks for mentioning Eric Ray. I haven't spoke with him, but actually a good friend of mine mentioned that person's name as well. So you're the second one, and that's important. I'm guessing Frank knows him. But
He does.
I think, you know, the reality is there's a feeling, and I feel it too, that there's something unjust about this whole process. I totally agree with you. I think unfortunately, you know, the General Assembly in its infinite wisdom has said this is permissible, that if you're a public utility, you know, you go through this process through the State Corporation Commission, and at the end, if you get approval, it will come with the delegated power to take private property for a project like this.
but you know, one thing is, you know, you're gonna have this jury of people that are gonna help appraise it. We've seen it where they could rig these juries, and I hope it's not people that are on, Betco or Dominion Energy's, list of, if you don't vote for us, you know, your rates are gonna go up. So that's my last thing,
Well, I
and it's
appreciate
not a
that.
question.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I mean, I think, you know, I think we'll get a fair jury. You know, I think that the jury selection process is designed to sort of weed out anybody who might have some sort of bias. You know, so I think we'll get a fair jury, but you're right that you know, Dominion has a lot of influence, in politics and in life. Probably most of us pay power bills to Dominion, so, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Question for you. One of the things that has come out before is these unelected bodies exercising government power. And that's really what the SEC is kind of doing. Have we seen any way that stuff is gonna stop? Because it looks like Dominion in more than one instance has abused that power with the SEC to simply use them as, you know, oh, here, approve our stuff and go.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I haven't seen any direct challenges to that. I've seen a challenge on the federal level. The kind of federal analog is called FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And I know there's been some challenges to FERC's authority, particularly in kind of a natural gas pipeline context. I thought I saw that recently the Supreme Court declined to hear that appeal, the one appeal that I was aware of that sort of came out of a case involving property owners in the western part of Virginia on what's called the Mountain Valley Pipeline. I don't know about, you know, direct challenges to, you know, the SEC's authority. I agree with you as far as kind of the process going, and in particular, you know, it's removed from the folks that are gonna be affected by it. to a degree where I don't know that Frank was notified that this was something that he could participate in at the State Corporation Commission. I doubt it. Maybe he got something in the mail, you know, and maybe other property owners did as well. But one of the things that the judge in Virginia Beach felt was significant was that, well, Mr. Walton didn't show up and object to the route at the State Corporation Commission, so, you know, we can't rehear that at this point. And, okay, fine, but that's in a lot of cases, that's cost prohibitive for an individual property owner to hire an attorney to participate in the SCC process, which may or may not affect his property depending upon what gets decided there. That kind of thing is really, it gets so far removed from the ability of the individual property owner to actually have a say and to object and to timely raise their objections, that it sort of becomes, it becomes more and more unfair, so, you know.
The question is, if you get an award of a certain amount of money from the court, does that include attorney fees, or do you have to subtract the attorney fees from that? So you're really not getting just compensation because you're having to fight them and then pay someone that knows how to fight.
Yeah, it does not include attorney's fees, and in general, in Virginia at least, attorney's fees are not recoverable in eminent domain cases. So you're exactly right. I mean, the compensation that whatever a jury would award in this case, Mr. Walden is going to pay my attorney's fees out of that, so he's going to net less than what the jury told him was fair, just compensation. Absolutely.
That seems unbelievable.
I agree. Maybe at some point we'll get the legislature, the General Assembly to do something about that. There are other jurisdictions, I know in Florida, for example, attorney's fees in eminent domain cases are separate. They're awarded, basically it's a sliding scale depending upon what the just compensation award is, then there's additional attorney's fees that have to be paid on top of that. Maybe that's something we can work on at our General Assembly. We've talked about it for a long time. I think whenever we as attorneys sort of talk to legislators about that, a lot of times they get this pushback, well, that's just lining your own pockets. It's not really about me, I'm gonna earn my attorney's fees regardless. What it really means is my client's actually gonna get more compensation and they're gonna get the full benefit of what they're entitled to under the Constitution. But I think whenever attorneys who practice in this area propose it, we sort of get this, well, you're just trying to get more money for yourselves, and it's really not the case. It's really for our clients to help them recover the full amount.
Steve,
Yeah.
Two questions. One, the eminent domain constitutional amendment, that has no impact on this whatsoever, I'm assuming. Number two, it used to be that you had three people on the commission. The property owner got to choose two of the three, and then the city or the locality would choose the other, but that's now expanded. And the third one is, who decided the actual corridor of this, and could they not have moved it somewhat so it doesn't unjustly impact Mr. Walton's property?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Robert. I'll take those in reverse order. The corridor, the route for this project was decided at the State Corporation Commission, and generally what happens is Dominion, when they apply for approval, they will submit sort of maybe 5 or 6 or a handful of different proposed routes for a line like this. Most of the time, I'm very cynical about this, but most of the time, there's really one route that they want, and then maybe they have a couple other routes that are like stalking horses that get people really upset. So then people say, well, don't bring it over here, you need to go over there, which is what Dominion wanted to begin with. So that is one of the things that the State Corporation Commission decides, and it's, they have staff with the SEC who are involved in that. Anybody else could involve themselves. Generally, if they wanted to, I guess you can do it without an attorney, but most people who want to get involved are hiring an attorney there. And so that, to be involved in the route process is very difficult as far as an individual goes or an individual property owner goes. What was the second question, Robert?
The Constitution, the representatives on the commission.
Oh, yeah. So there used to be a system before I started practicing in 2008. There was years before there was a commission system to determine just compensation in these cases, and it wasn't a jury. It was commissioners And both sides would submit a list of commissioners who were basically just people that they probably knew in the jurisdiction, who might have some, particular knowledge. So a lot of times it was kind of like your friends. It's a very strange system. And generally, right, the court would say, well, 3 people get, or maybe the landowner gets to put 3 commissioners and the condemnor 2, or vice versa. But you have commissioners who know the parties, or one of the other parties, and they would be tasked with determining compensation. Several years ago, though, they got rid of the commission system and they made it this jury system, and then maybe, 2010, something like that, they brought back the commissioner system as an option. So it's still available. The property owner can choose basically whether he or she wants a jury or a commission to determine just compensation. We chose jury in this case. I think the jury is going to be fair. And the commission system, a lot of times what happens is you get to trial and not enough commissioners show up, and so then the case gets postponed. That's happened to me a couple of times, and so we want to avoid that kind of situation. And then your first question was about the constitutional amendment. In 2012, Virginians overwhelmingly approved a constitutional amendment which helps protect and strengthen the protection of private property rights. The only real application that has to this situation is it allows for property owners, or business owners rather, to make a claim for lost profits in certain circumstances. And so we think Walton Funeral Home will make a claim for lost profits in the context of this case. There's a value of the property itself, but then there's also this kind of, not really a property interest, but it's the loss of income or expected profits to the business that's operated on the property, which didn't exist in our Constitution prior to 2012, but which we think will allow Walton Funeral Home to make a claim for that lost profits. Yeah.
No. Turn the button, push up.
There we are. This little story I'm going to tell you ends with a question, right? So in Mississauga, Ontario, I don't know if you know about this, there was a nuclear power plant was put on the lake shore, and they ran high tension wires straight across all these neighborhoods, very tall towers, to transport the electricity into the grid, I suppose. And then shortly thereafter, nuclear fell out of
Favor.
favor. Thank you. That's the word I'm looking for. Thank you. Nuclear fell out of favor. They shut down the plant. This whole thing stood for a while, and then they decided those copper wires were worth a lot of money, so they came through and they took all the copper off all of these towers. It was a big process, and the towers still are there on what used to be people's property. So, the question: this particular set of lines over Walton's funeral home, is to convey electricity from offshore. Yes?
Yes.
All right. So the answer is yes. Now, when those towers fall apart or are taken down because there's better ways to make electricity, what is going to happen? They're going to have to come through and tear all this stuff up for the copper. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's possible. Certainly, what they're taking is a permanent, perpetual easement, which means it's going to last forever, or until the end of the world. Maybe.
It's like in Ontario.
Yeah, and so it may be at some point, maybe in the not too distant future, when these aren't needed, for transmitting electric power for one reason or another. Dominion will still have the easement, or if Dominion doesn't exist, whoever they left it to will still have this easement, and they have the right, in addition to installing the lines and these poles, they have the right to come on the property at any point to do maintenance, to do repairs. If there's a problem, they have the right to come on and do that, and they have the right to come on and reconfigure the actual structures on the property really at any point in their discretion. So absolutely, those kinds of things. I think a real estate appraiser, if you're valuing what's being taken in this easement, they have to value all of the rights that are being taken and assuming that they will be exercised. Otherwise, the property owner won't be fully compensated. So, those kinds of things, we have to consider that as a potential impact to the property and to the value of the property today, that maybe in the future, they might be back doing additional work. Yes, sir.
Yeah, how far, I'm looking at the satellite picture, and it's, there's already lines going through the, area. And, you're saying that this is gonna go over top of the building in the parking lot, or, as I'm looking at it, the present building is quite a distance, not, 60 feet or so off
Right.
the present line.
Right.
And then this second part of that is, we're looking at this thing, and these lines gonna go directly over people's houses, in some of these neighborhoods. Are they purchase the entire property, or are people gonna have to live with these wires over there?
I don't know exactly, as part of your second question, in general, Dominion is not gonna allow anybody to have a building, an above-ground structure within their easement. So, if the lines are proposed to go over any existing homes or buildings or anything like that, they're gonna be obligated to acquire that whole building, generally the whole property. With regard to the Walton Funeral Home, the lines are not going directly over, the building, they're just sort of off the corner of the building, but they are directly over the parking lot. And just for your understanding, the typical width of this new easement, there is a pre-existing easement that's kind of on the north corner of the property. It's screened by some trees right now. The new easement, is 105 feet wide along essentially its entire corridor, except for as it comes by the Walton Funeral Home building, it's narrowed down to 85 feet wide. And that's because if it was still 105 feet wide, it would go over the building, and they would have to take the building and compensate the property owner for the loss of the whole building. So they squeezed it down to kind of shoehorn it in here in order to avoid, in their view, having to compensate the property owner for the overall impact of it. But that begs the question, why isn't it 85 feet along the entire corridor? If they can do it on this one stretch, why is the rest of the easement 105 feet wide? I don't know the answer to that.
Well, that was gonna additionally ask that, especially, and then if they're only cutting it down to the, they're cutting it down maybe from 100, that doesn't seem like a fair thing for the property owner to achieve.
Right. Yeah, they're definitely, they're definitely working hard to try to minimize the amount that they think they have to pay. That's for sure. The reality is that I think it's having an impact to the building, whether it's directly over the top of the building or just off the corner of the building, it's gonna have a pretty similar impact as far as I think the damage in value to the building and the rest of the property. Yeah.
Please forgive my ignorance about electricity, but, I
Me
see,
too.
I see power lines underground all over the place in most new cities and subdivisions. Can they put these high power lines underground?
They
And
could.
shield them?
Yeah, they could and they probably should, but it's a lot more expensive for them. And so, again, that was part of the State Corporation Commission proceeding. Like I said, the first, when the lines come ashore, which is, I think, it used to be called Camp Pendleton or something, now it's the Virginia State Military Reservation. They're coming ashore underground there, and they're underground all the way to this new switching station at Oceana. And part of that is because state property, city property, federal government property, Dominion cannot use eminent domain to take easements from those folks. And so I think they basically had to do whatever the government told them to do, which in this case was keep the lines underground.
So the citizens are a stepchild to be abused by the legislators who receive campaign contribution favors from
Right.
Pepco.
Absolutely. A lot of them. Yes, that's correct, yeah.
Does that reek of corruption?
Just a little bit, yeah.
Steve, are you saying that a court doesn't have the jurisdiction? Because I understand that cities can sue each other over eminent domain issues. Are you saying the state corporation is precluded from going to court with their certificate of need and getting a judge to rule that in fact that a city easement is inviolate, prohibits their, but now if the state's granted, they're precluded from having a court of law to get a judicial order to that effect?
So, I think, John, I wanna make sure, so what Dominion, there's a process for Dominion Power, to go to court and get court approval to use eminent domain to take, let's say, city-owned property. It is a much more laborious process than taking your or my private property. And so Dominion never does that. Instead, they just work a deal out with the municipality wherever they're crossing their land.
So what it really is that because governmental entities have the access to confiscate our revenue, therefore they have no barrier for legal costs, Dominion Energy can't outspend them.
Right.
Okay, just wanna make sure that people listening know how that works, but thank you.
Further questions? Well, if I see no further questions, I just want to thank you and applaud you for coming here and telling us so much about what's
Yeah,
going on.
thank you all. Thanks so much.
Steve, before you go, how do we stay abreast of this? We're getting just a little bit of information from the Virginia pilot. How are we gonna access it so that folks everywhere, so that everybody out there, including everybody watching this morning, will be able to track this and its future development?
Right. Well, I'll certainly keep you informed, and if it's something that you're willing to sort of send out to your list, Robert, I'd be glad to do that. Like I said, I think we're trying to put together a rally at the site. The NAACP is involved, which I think is wonderful. Some of you may know they were involved in the Supreme Court case called Kelo versus City of New London, where the Supreme Court said it's okay to take private property for economic development. The NAACP was involved on behalf of the property owner in that case because they recognize that unfortunately in eminent domain cases, a lot of times it's the folks who are more marginalized, who have less political power, who wind up being the victims of the abuse of eminent domain. So we're grateful for that. I think Mr. Walton, I know he's talked with some politicians. I think he spoke with the Speaker of the House of Delegates the other day. So there are higher up folks who are paying attention to this. But the more folks we can get to contact their legislators, to contact their, city government, I think the more pressure ultimately we can put to bear on Dominion to really do the right thing here. But I will keep you informed, Robert.
Thank you so much. Ben, thank you.
Thank you very much. Once again, we appreciate your having come to us today. I don't think we have to pay those
No.
inordinate compensation. All right, so onward and upward. Do we have any candidates?
Believe we have a mayoral or candidate?
I don't know, there's a tall man in the back who probably would like to come up and speak about his campaign, how it is
Never.
going. Never skips a chance. John Moss, the mayor.
Thank you, Bill. Well, I think it's always interesting. I always say elections are really about the future. And we all have heard the expression that the best predictor of the future is the past. So if we all look at who the incumbents are, independent of their party affiliation or being independent, if you want to get more of the same, then you need to make sure they go back. So if you like having the city's budget grow faster than yours, if you like seeing your standard of living reduced so the city doesn't have to get its budget as lean as yours, then you want to make sure that those folks who are owned but unduly influenced and are receptive to special interests who like to use your taxpayers' dollars to enable their profits, then you know who your candidates are. But I want to offer an alternative. Because what you're going to see in this race, the dominant contributors are going to be behind two of the major parties' endorsed candidates. I'm not going to mention their names because you know who they are, but the interesting thing is their voting record is the same, except for collective bargaining. But on taxes, on rezoning south of the Green Line, voting for Atlantic Park, making sure, not giving you any of your surplus money back, not giving you any tax rebate, they vote the same. So what you have is the uniparty And if you go to vpap.org, you can see who the investors of the Uniparty are. And that's the party that we need to put out of power. So I'm running in this race to give you the opportunity to see what this city could be like when it operates on something other than the undue influence of special interest. And I find it amazing that we have candidates who are running campaigns on TV, including our current governor, who adopted fiscal conservative policies, who gave us tax rebates, who increased our standard deduction, doubled it, removed the state sales tax on food, but yet they're endorsing candidates who have done just the opposite. So you have to ask, are they walking the talk of the party principles they represent? They are not. And when you see John Moss's name on the ballot, you see someone who for 17 years has walked the talk, even when, against all odds, wasn't going to be successful. I never went along to get along. I presented budgets and allowed us to what? Have a revenue neutral budget, allowed us to reduce tax rates, and still met the basic core responsibilities of government. But you can't give away $153 million of borrowed money to Clarke. And I don't take $25,000 worth of donations from realty companies to violate the green line. We need to clean up the leadership of our city. And the only people that can accomplish that is you. You, the voters, have to decide. You've had enough of being taken advantage of. You know what the past has brought you. Bet on the future. Vote for John Moss for mayor. Thank you for your support.
Any questions? Would you take questions? I love questions.
Thank you, Michael.
Robert Dean has a question.
Yeah, John, you've been known as a watchdog or wonk, I guess, of city operations and expenditures, et cetera, et cetera. And you mentioned the rebates and all that from the governor, which we never see. Is it not true that we have a gentleman here this morning that does business plans for large corporations, but is it not true that during your discussions with the budget and finance department, that city, like on city, this Way Park and that, there has never been a business plan that corporate America would take to all financial institutions when they want to go borrow money? And as evidenced by the reports by our city auditor, Linda Remius, every single project has been running in the red. I mean, even the brand new sports thing in the first 3 years is all running in red. So is there, from your perspective, why do you think that they're not paying attention on city council to say to the city manager and the staff, you need to do a better job, like I do at home with my expenditures?
If you want something so bad you can't say no, you're not interested in the facts.
Oh, okay.
That's probably one bias. Secondly, they had a vision. If you have a vision that you don't have to pay for, much like teenagers want you to buy them a car, right? They have that brand new car, that Camaro, Mustang, or whatever. You're saying, wait a minute, we got a used car. Let's look at something practical. Well, when you're not using your money, you look at things differently. Now, there is a business plan that was done by the private sector.
Right.
And the private sector says, you have this vision, City of Virginia Beach, that you want to have on this property. Remember, the city went out with a RFP for a vision of what they were looking for.
RFP is?
Request for proposals. And this all came back, and then they ventured Wave LLC, got that, was awarded. The proposal took many years, maybe a decade to get that done. But the wave pool was supposed to be this iconic thing, was going to bring a different style to the beach. So they had a business plan, but that business plan couldn't get private capital if they had to raise all the capital for the project. So it needed what? It had to have public capital, meaning borrowing, paid for with taxes, not the profits of the business, now $153 million, to make their project work. Now, when they went to the private marketplace, they were still having issues, and times changed from the time they thought they had their idea. This is like you're gonna have a baby, but now the baby shows up and you find out, oh my gosh, it's a lot more expensive than I thought. Well, they had to then look, well, how are they going to make this work? So they had to find another partner to make the wave pool work. So they got a 5013C corporation or body to now operate the wave pool and allow some borrowing, which allowed them to borrow money at a lesser rate, but still the bonds were rated as industrial bonds, basically junk bonds. I think they had to end up paying 10 points percent, something on those. And then they had the other part, which was the retail and the apartments and the office. That was a tranche of bonds as well, also issued as junk bonds, which is a pretty expensive thing. And they required the principals to buy $20 million of that total thing of 120. They had to be on the hook, and they'd be paid last. So you can see that this was in the SEC filing for that, Robert. It was a lot of statements about high risk of this facility, especially the wave pool. So, but now on the city side, people can ask for everything. I never blame people in the private sector who ask, because that's like a spoiled child asking for something. They can't make it happen. Someone has to enable bad behavior. Someone has to enable a bad investment. So they come to the city council. Now what the city council didn't do, they didn't do a business analysis to say, does this pass the Warren Buffett test? When that means is, when will this property, my $153 million, which has an opportunity cost, but that's borrowing authority you can't spend for a school, you can't spend for a flood project. So it is not free. It costs you something. They decided that was a higher priority than other needs of the city. So what happens? They don't do that analysis. So now, after this, we're already committed, the city manager comes back and they've done this not done this analysis. What they've done to say is they don't know, because they never did this analysis before they said yes. They don't know when and if or ever that project will generate the first dollar that goes into the unrestricted general fund that pays police, pays all the general things your taxes go to. And on page 30 of that report, they said the earliest that would happen is 7.5 years after it opens. The first dollar. Now, how many dollars that is, that's also not known, but that's their best estimate. Who would invest $153 million to get a return of an unknown value 7.5 years in the future from 2025 in May when it's supposed to open? I suspect that's the Warren Buffett test, and I suspect it would fail.
Yeah.
So this is what, but we've done that on a number of things. This isn't the first project we've done this on. And also, as you may recall, they had to create a community development authority, which contains that 12 acres, and all the revenue that's taxed, that's generated in that square goes towards the debt service, the operation, and paying a performance fee of up to $5 million a year. And until all that is done, and there's excess money, there's no dividend to the people who had their line of credit used to make it possible. And what, you think we've learned something from that? No, because now they want to do a capstone project across from, to subsidize a convention hotel, good money after that, and then to convert the parking lot that we already own, that we condemned from people to get to start with, which under the new constitutional amendment, if it had been condemned now, they'd have to let the people who own the property be the first people to buy it back, but that doesn't qualify for that provision. And to put apartments and retail on that space, right? And then we have to what? Oh, we have to pay again to rebuild the parking we already have, plus help subsidize the parking for the apartments and retail. This is madness. But you can't sue council for not performing or poorly performing its fiduciary duties. If this was a corporation that did this, I suspect the stockholders could have a suit for failure to fulfill their fiduciary duties. Because why? You are the people that pay. So if you want to know, I don't know why we don't do it. All I know is I couldn't get involved in that thing because of investments that I had, not in the people doing it, but in the Exxon gas station and King Power. But I do know when I was involved with the arena project, which I know many of the people here thought I should support, but in that deal, all the risk was privatized, and we had an exit strategy, and when they couldn't meet their terms, we didn't give them more money, maybe because I was a pain in the butt maybe, we didn't give them an extension, and we exercised the contract to terminate when they failed to meet the terms. They took us to the state Supreme Court and we prevailed. This Atlantic Park had no exit strategy. They kept pouring good money after bad. And now we need, it's in our best interest, sorry to say, it's a sunk cost, but we need it to work. Because if it doesn't work, it's even more painful. But we need to show we've learned a lesson from it, but we haven't learned it. Like I said, the past is the best predictor of the future. We don't change the decision makers, we don't change the mistakes.
Yes, Mr. Moss, could you tell us something about your background and your service and your qualifications as far as financial analysis and things like that versus some of your competition? I know the folks in the room perhaps know that, perhaps some folks online don't know all about you.
Well, I spent, thank you for that question. He's asked me, so though you might not have heard it, just what is my professional background history. I'm glad to say I'm retired. I'm glad to say that I'm not certain I was good enough in my investments to outlast all this inflation, but I can say that at least I learned how to live way below my means so I didn't have to live on the street. But it's getting tougher every day. But I spent 41 years working for the United States Navy as a civilian. Gosh, in program evaluations, resource management, warfare analysis. I've worked on the staff, mostly working for political appointees and 3- and 4-star flag officers. That's headquarters staff has been my background. And my last job, and I'll focus on that because I think it represents everything I did. I was the director of submarine program requirements. That's an enterprise that's $22 billion annually. We're buying ships, we're paying sailors, paying civilians, paying for maintenance, paying for experimentation, modernization, you name it. Repairing dry dock, $750 million construction project to repair a dry dock. So I've had my whole life is this making recommendations to flag officers as to what requirements, not what to fund, that's easy what to fund. The analysis and the heavy lifting is deciding and understanding the risk of what you don't fund. So I know a lot of people think I was like a comptroller. No, I'm not in the budget, I'm not an accountant. I'm an analyst that looks at, is the requirement valid? What's the best way to fund it? What's the phasing of that? How's the acquisition strategy? How's the oversight of the construction? And when does a project, of course in the military, you're not interested in return on investment in a classic sense. You want to know is, does it give you a return in the warfighting capability that puts your adversaries on their backside and makes them think twice about doing things that we would prefer they not do to advance our national interest? Very technical work, pricing, costing, contracting, all the things. We build training facilities like schools. You know, we build sewage plants in some cases, believe it or not. It all depends. But I have a vast knowledge of what having to set priorities, and I know my good friend Dan Chang worked as a resource sponsor up and up now as well. You get put through the ringer. The process is not friendly to asking for more money. They tell you, why can't you self-finance your own issue? And believe me, and as soon as you get the money, people are wanting to get it back. And so you have to make sure that you're executing in a timely fashion, right? You don't fund positions you know you're never going to fill, because the minute that you get through that first quarter of payroll and you got a couple $1 million sitting up there, someone who's got bills to pay sweeps it away. But the city, what does it do? It says, oh, at the end of the year, we have this huge surplus. Because $20 million or $28 million of it is positions or pay periods where they didn't obligate what they said they would, because they know they're never going to have 100% of the people on board every pay period, but they budget for it, they appropriate it for it, which is overtaxing, and then they claim a surplus. It's no surplus, it's bad budgeting. So, and I'll close on this. I don't like, no one likes to brag on themselves, but when I did retire, the Secretary of the Navy did award me the highest award a civilian can get, the Distinguished Civilian Service Award. That is not a common award that people earn. It's a very, very few of those, but I think it was a recognition, and in fact, he did state that, for my good stewardship of delivering combat capability and readiness within the resources we were provided. And unlike the city, they provide you top-down guidance. City council needs to provide top-down guidance. They shouldn't get a budget that they aren't looking to receive.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Moss,
Yeah.
we appreciate your time and this, no, don't turn it off yet. And what you plan to do for the city. Just to round out this, tribute to John Moss, we'd like to know your educational background.
Well, you can go to mossformayor.com. JohnMossForMayor.com is my website. I have a lot of stuff on there. But I want, not every city, but obviously the Navy did send to go to the John F. Kennedy School of Government. I also went to the War College senior officer class. It was a great experience. Met a lot of people there. It's 1,600 pages of reading a week. They used to say it's only a lot of reading if you do it all. But I was a geo bachelor, and I was, besides being at the gym, I was bored to death, so I read it all. So that's a good thing. I was a distinguished graduate, which means I was one of the top 5, not top 5%, but top 5 of all the students there. Because I did read all that material. It was a great experience. Anyone who has been there knows what that is. Got my master's from Waldo and Lyle University. But I'm primarily a Hokie from Virginia Tech, and I'm glad of that. And like my wife, we're both all attended, and my children too, all went to the public schools in Virginia Beach. And I'm an alumni of Princeton High School. I can't even say the year now, I'm so old I don't care. 1972, that's when I graduated from that fine institution, which is still structurally sound.
Yes,
and
it
does
is.
not need to be raised. It needs to be modernized. I've been to schools in Michigan, the Henry Ford High School. I was at a wedding. I went to the Little Rock High School, which was even already operational in the year that Princess Anne opened, 1954. Very fine, solid structural facilities. Modernization, yes. Total replacement is not good stewardship, in my personal opinion. But that's my background, and I always say is the thing that keeps you humble is your wife and your kids.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moss.
At this point, we will accept any announcements from the floor or any representatives of the candidates.
Give
Mr.
Tom.
B.
You gotta give him the mic.
Sure.
Want to remind people of the 9/12 meeting. It's going to be August 26th, a Monday night at 6:30, and I'd like you to be there. We're going to be going over Hillsdale College's lecture series. Thank you.
So, just repeat the venue and
The venue. Why
Great.
not?
Why not Pizza, Great Neck Road?
Great.
Why not Pizza, Great Neck Road?
And it's what time?
6:30
6:30.
for dinner, and then 7 we start watching video.
And what day?
26th of August.
Which is what day?
Monday.
Monday, the
Always
26th
the
of
fourth
August.
Monday.
The 4th Monday. Thank you very much. Any other announcements from the floor? Nothing from our police chief? No? Okay, well, with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Okay, sure can.
Ordered a motion to
Yeah.
adjourn, and someone has seconded it? Yes, thank you very much. Okay, so, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?